now time to welcome our special guest. And our special guest, by the way, as Joe alluded to, he's a New Jersey native. He studied at Syracuse University College in New Jersey and would go on to broadcast sports for Princeton University and St. Joseph's University. McCarthy would soon become the play-by-play broadcaster for the Reading Fightin' Phils and the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs of the Philadelphia Phillies organization, an organization, of course, which his legendary father, Tom McCarthy, has called home in the broadcast booth for over 16 years. Earlier this year, McCarthy joined the New York Mets broadcast family as an additional play-by-play commentator and the host of the pre- and post-game shows for WCBS 880. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pat McCarthy. What's up, Pat?
Hey, guys. How are you? Appreciate you having me on.
Of course.
Thanks
Thank you for joining us, Pat. We appreciate you joining us and spend your time here on ESB with us here. So let's take it back a bit because we want to talk about your career and what it's led up to here with the Mets opportunity. Is there a time in your life that you can think early on that you can pinpoint where something clicked in your mind saying, I need to become a sports broadcaster?
Yeah, I think it happened a little bit later than maybe some people that wanted to get into the industry, especially as you mentioned, having grown up in it with my dad. I was probably around 16 or 17 years old when I decided that this is what I wanted to do full time. I wanted to be a history teacher at one point. I considered going into law. I had a bunch of different things that I really had interest in doing. That's always been my real passion was world history and American history. And that's what I thought I was going to study up until probably my sophomore year of high school when I hosted our high school newscast called A-Town Live at Allentown High School, where I went. And by the time my senior year rolled around, I'd been doing it for 2 or 3 years. And we had an interesting way of doing our homerooms where our homerooms were after first period. And I had my TV production class during first period. And then our newscast would run right after that. So I had a conversation with my TV production teacher where I said, listen, I'd really like to make this 15-minute broadcast into the best thing that we can make it into. So he said, okay, great. If you can devote the 90-minute first block period just to making A-Town Live as great as you can be, that's all you have to do. You wouldn't have to do it. I didn't have to do any other classwork outside of devoting 90 minutes to make this 15-minute production the best it could be. So I would sit there during class. I would write scripts. I would cut highlights that I went out and shot the day before from a lot of the fall sports at Allentown because I had played basketball and I played baseball. So I was kind of limited to just the fall sports, but that's where I got my first passion for it. And then the other thing is as I was getting older and I started to have opportunities to go with my dad to different games and work with him in broadcast booths for NFL games and college sports, I started to realize, okay, now this is really cool. And this is what I wanted to do. And I played baseball up and through college, but I'd always known that was probably the end of the line for me. I wasn't going to get a chance to play professionally. And I knew I needed to stay in baseball in some way, and I needed to stay in sports in some way. So decided that after my senior year of college, or going into the spring of my senior year of college, that I wasn't going to play baseball anymore at TCNJ, and I was going to dive into broadcasting full time. And it opened up opportunities at Princeton as a senior, and then ultimately that first internship in Reading. And from there, things just kind of got rolling from there to where I am now.
So yeah, Pat, are you saying that this all started with just a disdain for homework, and you were just getting out of homework and anything else, and that is really what kicked this off for you?
Yeah, I think I was going to do anything to not have to do classwork and do something that I was passionate about. And it's funny because it ended up being very similar in college. TCNJ doesn't have a sports broadcasting program. So I kind of molded things in my own way. I was a film major at TCNJ. I focused on film noir and the effects of post-war Europe. And that was what I studied as a senior. That's what I wrote my final paper on, which was really interesting to me. I really enjoyed it, but it had nothing to do with what I wanted to actually do in real life. So even as a senior, my senior practicum, which was met once a week, and then a massive final project for a lot of kids at TCNJ would be a short film. I went to my professor, Terry Byrne, who was there, and I said, listen, this isn't really what I'm open to doing. This isn't what I want to do. I have this internship lined up. I'm going to need to drive out to Reading every other week anyway for home games. Can I just use that as my senior practice? And he said, of course. Why wouldn't you do it that way? And I did the same thing. I had an independent study where I hosted a podcast so I could have other broadcasters on. I hosted it once a week. It never even went anywhere. It would just get turned into my advisor, and I used that as a full credit course. So I was looking for any way possible to not do extra work in school, but still figure out ways to get to where I needed to be to prepare myself to get into the professional world.
That's a great story. And listen, I mean, you know, I've been in that situation. I used college radio, get semester credit for the maximum. I think I got 3 credits for, so I kind of cheesed it myself. So I can kind of relate to that. But, you know, fast forward to this year, obviously you're in the minor leagues, you're looking for that big opportunity. Walk us through how the process went with the Mets, from whether the call to the interview. For those of us who have never been on an interview like that, you know, what is that like, receiving that phone call from one of the biggest sports franchises, you know, in the game of baseball? And, you know, there's only 30 or 60 of these jobs, period, you know, if you break it down. So what's that feeling like when you get that call? And tell us a little bit about that process behind how the Mets, how you went through that interview with the Mets.
Yeah, it's a pretty surreal process. And it goes back to 2021, honestly. When I did my first big league game with the Phillies, I called a couple of games on TV, and it's like a player for the first time when you go to the big leagues and you get that taste, and then you have to go down to the minors, and it's a really eye-opening experience for you of, okay, when am I going to get back, and how do I get back as quickly as I can? And then, you know, last year I got some more opportunities in Philadelphia, which was a pretty incredible stretch run down to the World Series. So I got to be a part of that, and that really got the fire going of, okay, I need to figure out my best path to the big leagues. And maybe that means going outside the Phillies organization, which I had been in for my entire professional career in the minors, from Reading to Lehigh Valley and then Philadelphia. And New York, to me, was the perfect place to go to. My dad spent 2 years in the Mets broadcast booth, so I was very familiar with Howie already and Chris Majkowski and everything, and Gary and all those guys. So it seemed like a really good fit. And then Jake Eisenberg left for Kansas City, and then the news comes out that Wayne is going to get the TV job in LA. So here I'm thinking, okay, there's 2 opportunities in the booth. And I had been close the year before. I'd interviewed for the job that Jake had the year prior. So I knew I had already had the connections with the folks in New York. So the process was pretty quick, honestly. Right after New Year's, I got a call saying, hey, this is what's going to be happening. This is kind of where we're looking in the directions. Are you interested in applying? And at that point, I already sent everything in. I was like, oh, yeah, it's already there. Don't worry. I've already applied for it. And then end of January came around, Martin Luther King Day. Actually, I got a call from Ray Martell, who is our executive producer. And he said, hey, we'd like for you to interview for the position. Let's set up a time. So that was Monday. I interviewed on, I believe, Thursday. And then it was the following Friday that I got the call from Ivan Lee, who's the program director at WCBS 880, to let me know that I had gotten the job as the number 3 and that I would be doing the pre and post for all 162 games, and then filling in for Howie when he was unable to do games, and got a chance now to work with Keith Rad, who has become honestly one of my closest friends. And over the last 4 or 5 months of knowing each other, it's pretty amazing because in the minor leagues, we're such a tight-knit community that for the most part, we all know each other in some way. Keith and I didn't know each other at all. We had never interacted. We had never met. We never crossed paths. And then we got down to spring training together and just hit the ground running. And it was a pretty seamless transition, honestly. We got to connect with each other probably 2 or 3 days after the news came out that we were going to be joining the booth. And from there, just hit the ground running.
Great. Now, glad to have you back, up here in New York, Pat, and love having you with the Mets. And I know you said your father was with the Mets, and that was 2006, 2007, two very big years for the Mets. One positive, one not so positive. I know this year right now for the Mets, a not so positive year. A lot of high expectations. This is a team that spent a ton of money. And every time it seems like they're inching back slightly. They had that nice little stretch before the All-Star break, but then they ended up losing that Padres series. They came out, won a few games, but now you lost this series versus the Red Sox. What's the general feel right now with this Mets team as you get to see them and travel with the team to all these different cities day in and day out?
Well, I think what you hear from them in the media is what we get a chance to see, is that these guys think that there's just too much talent in the clubhouse to not figure out a way to string together some wins. Unfortunately, here we are, July 24th, and we're getting pretty close to the end. As weird as that is to sound, we're almost at the 100-game mark already. So there's still time, but also a lot of time has already gone by. And I think they recognize that. And Buck Showalter, I think, has been pretty candid about it, just saying that each time it feels like they're starting to get something going, all of a sudden they take a couple of steps backwards. And he said that with certain guys individually too, that it's been 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And unfortunately, that's what it's been like for the Mets this year is, you go out to California and you win 7 of 10 and you feel like, okay, this team is really what we expected them to be, 7 games over 500. And since that point, outside of the 6-game winning streak, really haven't been able to string together a consistent stretch. And we're not talking about a consistent stretch of just 7 games right now. They have to string together a consistent stretch over the next 60 games where they have to play almost 600 to 700 baseball to get back into the wild card. Do I think they have the roster built to do it? I do. I think there's just too much talent. I think we're seeing Pete Alonso start to swing the bat much better. I think we're seeing Jeff McNeil start to swing the bat much better. And I think you can see that shift a little bit just in terms of their body languages and the feeling in the clubhouse. But then again, you have a game like we had on Sunday night where the Red Sox win 6-1. You drop 2 of 3, and it's like, okay, we're back to square one heading into the Yankees series. So it's tough. It's difficult, I think. It's difficult on the guys. I was talking with Mark Vientos the other day when he came up, and he said, we never want to lose. That's the last thing any of these guys want. They are so competitive. I asked Max Scherzer out in Los Angeles, what keeps him going? Why is he still pitching at 38, 39 years old? He said, I want to win a World Series. At this point in my career, that's why I'm here. David Robertson said the same thing. These guys came to New York to win a World Series. So they're disappointed, obviously, that right now that they're not in contention.
Yeah. And one thing I kept thinking of, oh, sorry, Rich, I was going to say, ironically, too, when we were in that rough stretch in May and June following that great West Coast trip, the one thing I kept thinking to myself, and this is great with your father being down with the Phillies, it's saying, all right, what team last year had that type of run where they were under 500 in June, but everything clicked at the right time? That's a team that barely made it into that 3rd wild card spot and represented the National League in the World Series. Only difference now between this Mets team and last year's Phillies team. And I think on paper, this Mets team is a better roster than last year's Phillies team. The only problem, and you said it perfectly, is where we are in the season, where we are with the games. I mean, almost at that 100-game mark, there really isn't much time, and they would really have to rip off almost a 5-1 week before the trade deadline. Because if you're not doing that, I just don't see how this team is going to be able to replicate what the Phillies did last year. I was really hoping this year's Mets team could be last year's Phillies team, but it's not looking so pretty right now because by this point last year, the Phillies were already over 500 again and starting to make a name in that wild card race.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is before we could even talk about the wild card is you have to get back to the 500 mark, right? And then from there, you can look at, okay, how many teams are ahead of you? But it's an interesting one or the other, right? Are you looking at, is the record the end all be all, or is it how many games out of the wild card are we? So you have to look at, I think, both in kind of different ways of, okay, yeah, 7 games out of the wild card, but 7 games under 500. And the other thing is, how many teams do you have to leapfrog to get in? If you're chasing 2 or 3 teams, you're thinking, okay, maybe something can happen here. Can we click off 10 of 15 and maybe they drop 6 of 10 or whatever, and all of a sudden you're chipping away. I just don't know right now how much time is left. There is time left, fortunately, to get to that spot, but it's just going to have to be chipping away. And it starts with winning series and eventually sweeping series.
If you're just joining us live here on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, we're here live with Pat McCarthy, the WCBS 880 radio broadcaster for the New York Mets. And now on the topic of the trade deadline, obviously there's been rumors swirling around players like Tommy Pham, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander. It's one of those weeks where it has to be arguably one of, if not two of the most important weeks of the season when setting up your team for postseason contention. Now, Pat, how do you see this team approaching the trade deadline come the next 7 days?
Honestly, I don't know. I think it's going to be really interesting, and it's going to be up all the way until Sunday, truthfully, and potentially all the way up until that off day on Monday on August 1st. So I think Steve Cohen and Billy Epler recognize where the team is at right now, and I can't see them adding at this point. It just doesn't make sense to trade away prospects to get different guys to come in and help to potentially make a run. I just don't see them doing that where they're at in the standings right now. Now, listen, if they rattle off, let's just say they rattle off 5 in a row right now to close out the week, and somebody ahead of them drops 5 straight, and now we're thinking, okay, now maybe they're only 3 games back. Okay, maybe you stay put where you're at and hope that these guys figure things out. Otherwise, guys that you mentioned, I think there's a lot of guys on 1-year deals on expiring contracts that could bring back some decent hauls. And if you think about even the Eduardo Escobar trade, just taking the entire salary, just that way you can get a bigger prospect or maybe a upper echelon prospect and somebody that's on the upper levels of the minors versus getting a high school kid who's 18 years old. Maybe you're getting a 22-year-old AA pitcher that can help you in the next 2 years. Because one thing we know about Steve Cohen and Billy Epler right now is this is not going to be any kind of rebuild. It's going to be a retool so that way this team can compete next year and continue to compete year on and year on. And Steve Cohen has said too, he said he's considered this money already spent. It's gone already. So he's willing to eat some of the salaries if it means bringing back some prospects. So guys that you mentioned, like Tommy Pham, David Robertson, maybe even a Brooks Raley, guys like that, who I think have been really good this season, could potentially be dealt. I'd love to see them stick around because I think they could really help this team if they figure things out during the last 2.5 months.
Yeah. Leading into that, obviously the handicap for this team, I think we can all kind of agree, has been the inconsistency in the pitch, and particularly the front end, especially the top 2 guys that are making the most money in the sport. Do you see, we know Robertson could probably move, Pham and those guys are easy. They're on 1-year deals, but the 2 big guys, it's clearly not working out. I don't know if the pitch clock has something to do with it, or is it father time? But, can you see these guys, one of them at least, moving on the trade deadline?
Well, it's up to them, honestly. And that's what it comes down to is, do they want to waive their no trade clauses to go somewhere? And are teams willing to take on the contracts? Max Scherzer's in an interesting position. He has an opt-out after this year. He's going to make $43 million next year. Will he opt in? He's probably not going to get $43 million anywhere else. And if he sees that this team still has a path to win beyond next year, I would think that he stays. I think it would have to be the right move for these guys, though. And Justin Verlander has said that he came to New York to win a World Series, and he wants to win a World Series in New York. So, I think that they're going to stay. I think it would require the Mets taking on a good chunk of the contract in order to move them. And I think at that point, the Mets would rather just have them in the rotation so that way they can compete through the next 2 months. And hey, who knows what happens in the next 2 months, but you need to be able to put a team together that's going to win. And those guys help you win when they're in your rotation.
Yeah. Following up on that, we did ask our Twitch and YouTube chats if they had any questions for you, Pat. And we do have a question more related to the trade deadline, but more of the after effect. Pat, what are your thoughts on the baby Mets? Do you think come August 1st, if the Mets sell, they should have all 4 kids, as in Beatty, Alvarez, Viento, Mauricio, playing every day? And that is from J Hertz 122, Jonathan Hernandez. What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I've been blown away by Francisco Alvarez. First off, I saw him a little bit in AAA last year when Syracuse came to Lehigh Valley, and I didn't know what to expect, honestly. I had heard a lot about him, but I didn't really know what he was going to do. And he came up and he looked overmatched in the first couple of weeks when he got to the big leagues. And man, has he answered every single question. So I don't think there's any questions about Francisco Alvarez. He's going to play every single day if he can. And then Omar Narvaez will spell him. Brett Beatty, I think he's proven that he can play third base at this level. And I think he's going to go through these ebbs and flows of a rookie season because we've seen some flashes of some really impressive stuff. And those guys are really fun to watch. And then you throw Vientos into the mix. The three of them together are really cool to watch interact with each other just because they've all come up through the system together. And you can tell that they're all great friends. And what I think is most interesting about them is that they all come from different backgrounds. You have Vientos from Florida. You have Alvarez from Venezuela. You have Beatty from Texas, and how these guys have come together and they've become really, really good friends over the season. So I would love to see them continue to play. I do think Mark Vientos is going to be here for a good amount of time, especially with the injury to Luis Guillorme and how long Luis is potentially going to be out and the question marks around Starling Marte's health. So I think if Vientos is here, I think he's going to have to play. So that way you can see what you have from him. And then Ronnie Mauricio right now is pretty remarkable. I do think we'll see him at some point this season. The numbers that he's putting up in AAA are just out of this world. The numbers that we saw in spring training were really impressive. So I would love to see Mauricio come up here and play. But again, if he's going to come up here, he has to play. And I think that's the number one thing post-trade deadline is, will these guys play consistently? And if not, maybe it's best for them to stay in AAA. But it'll be interesting to see after August 1st.
Corey, I know you had a question on.
Yeah, no, definitely. It would be interesting to see what happens after this trade deadline's done. But looking back just to this last weekend, I know you're up in Boston for the Red Sox series there. And definitely have to ask, as your experience as a fan and now also in the booth working with the team, you've seen a lot of different stadiums, a lot of different ballparks. Just curious to know what your favorite city and or ballpark to visit is, whether it's through work or as a fan. Because Fenway, for me personally, I love the history aspect of it. I know history was your favorite subject in school, as was mine. So I just love going in there because something about Fenway, you walk into that stadium and it feels like a historic park as soon as you walk in. As old as it is, I feel like they do a great job maintaining it, although seeing the water going through and people doing the slip and slides looked a little fun there. But I have to ask, through your travels with the team and as a fan, what is your favorite city and or ballpark to go visit?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate that this year I've gone to a lot of ballparks that I hadn't gone to in years past. And for me, when we rolled up to Dodger Stadium for the first time, we got off the bus and Keith and I both looked at each other and just went, wow. Because we're doing this together for the first time. You know, both of us are in the big leagues for the first time together. So we're getting a chance to see a lot of these ballparks together for the first time. So Dodger Stadium was really awesome. I love San Francisco. Petco Park was really neat in San Diego. But I will say this weekend in Fenway was pretty special. In between the doubleheaders, Keith and I went out. We walked out to the Monster. We went inside the Monster. We got a chance to sign the Monster. To me, that was a really cool experience. I love Wrigley. All those ballparks have so much great feel to them. I love any kind of ballpark that has character to it and that has a different type of feel to it. If I were to give you my favorite, though, and you wrap that with favorite city, it's probably Pittsburgh. I love PNC Park. I love Pittsburgh as a city.
No.
And that was a great trip this year.
I love
Tom
it.
does not like Pittsburgh for some strange reason.
Pat, I'm right there with you. It's the best. It's the
Again,
PNC is my personal
listen,
favorite.
My argument, why does that stadium get credit for a skyline that they didn't create, blows my mind. Yeah. Also, for the record, Pat, I went to it was a Met Pirate game a few years ago, and they had half the concession stands just closed, and that was pretty off-putting.
So it wasn't a great experience.
It wasn't a great experience, and I think it's very, very overrated. But I know I'm on an island there.
It's my number one, though. Don't worry, Pat. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Fenway. You know what, the uniqueness of the way they incorporate that stadium into the city, where they section off the streets. Your ticket gets you into the street. It doesn't get you necessarily into the stadium. And just the ability to go in and out and walk around. It just feels so old school for me and so different than sitting on the BQE and waiting to get to Citi Field or the Cross Bronx to get to Yankee Stadium, where you're basically parking lot to stadium. That to me is just, it's a totally different experience, which makes it so cool.
Yeah, I love that it's right there in the neighborhood. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's built into the fabric of the city, which is just amazing.
And it's picturesque, as you can find on possibly Instagram. Make sure to give us a follow on Instagram at Empire State of Baseball. You give our handles a follow at Corey Favs, at JR Pugs, at Rich J Rivera, and at T Waspel. Pat, I believe it's at PXP McCarthy _. Did I get that right?
I think so. I don't know. I always get confused because I have two, right? I have my personal one, and then I got it. And I always forget what my work one what the handle actually it is. Twitter's correct, I can tell you that. And there's a link to Instagram in the Twitter bio. I know that.
Twitter
X. There we go. P McCarthy _PXP. That's what we had on Instagram there. Unless Pat changed in the last 24 hours. Shame on you, Pat. All righty. Well, we got a game to play. It is called Trick of the Trade. It is a game we play on a monthly basis. And with the trade deadline in 7 days' time, this is the best time to throw this one up here. And guess what? For the first time, it's a Mets-Yankees deal with a Mets question and a Yankees question. So this trade happened July 16, 2003. The Mets got one single player in a 3-player deal with the Yankees, sent Ryan Bigcondoa, Anderson Garcia, and a mystery player. So I need to know the 2 mystery players, one for the Yankees and one from the Mets. What are we thinking, Pat?
Oh, gosh, I have absolutely no idea.
Yes. Music to my ears.
So the Mets acquired one player. The Mets acquired one and sent 3 to the Yankees in 2003.
The Mets sent one player to the Yankees, and the Yankees sent 3 players to the Mets in the deal. I actually have it switched, but the Yankees sent those 3 players to the Mets. I know. I've never gotten it wrong. This is the first time I've ever gotten it wrong. Yankees send these 3 players to the Mets. The Mets sent one player to the Yanks.
Boy, I couldn't. Robin Ventura? I have no idea.
Not a big guess.
Robin Ventura was in a trade straight up for David Justice a couple years prior to this deal, but it's not that deal.
Love good Ventura.
I feel like it's like Mike Stanton, like the original Mike Stanton.
Ooh,
he pitched for both.
The
teams,
real Mike,
right?
Not the artist formerly known.
Stanton is not involved in this deal, but I will say the Mets sent a reliever to the Yankees in this deal.
I know the Mets side where they traded. The Mets traded Benitez. I just cannot tell you who the Yankee
that is correct. Yes, that is correct. So Armando Benitez is the Mets player going in the deal. The Yankees player, I'll give you a couple of hints. The Yankees player has Staten Island relevance and shares his last name is the same as the first name of one of the 2 players in the Yankees deal.
Huh. His last name is one of the same as his first name.
So last name is probably Anderson, right?
Yes, sir.
I think so. Unless they traded Matt Ryan. It could have been like a pre-football.
Also going to be looking in the chat too for
Jason Anderson.
It is Jason Anderson. Anderson, Joe. Very good. Very good. So you add to your lead. That's ever so growing. Get out my screen, Ronald Acuna Jr. You're not ready yet. All righty, but that's correct. Yes, Armando Benitez went to the deal to the Yankees. Benitez had like a sub-2 ERA in his first few appearances with the Yanks. He was struggling there with the Mets at the tail end of his career. Entered the Yankees as a settlement. So that was a cool Mets-Yankees deal.
Definition of a roller coaster that Benitez was. But
he was.
Before we get you out of here, Pat, we'll just ask you one more question, and I got to ask this. With your father being the Phillies broadcaster, what's Thanksgiving dinner going to be like this year? Especially if one of the teams is going to definitely finish ahead of the other one. What's it going to be like? Who's going to get the bragging rights at Thanksgiving this year?
Well, I don't know. Thanksgiving is always difficult. We always end up working for some reason. We're always working an NFL game or a college football game somewhere. Actually, the picture to the right is a perfect example. That's the day after Thanksgiving this year in Missouri. Boy, my hair was really high that day. Either way, yeah, I think what makes our relationship really neat is that we don't always talk shop. to be honest. We try and just stick with where we're at different moments. And I think that's what, whenever we get together, especially for Thanksgiving and stuff like that, it's always special. So, yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Right now, both teams are trying to make a push towards the playoffs. And at the beginning, I thought both teams were going to get in. We'll see what happens.
One very last question. I promise one more Twitch question. This is going to be from Greg Kandari 11. What advice would you give to someone who wants to get into broadcasting?
Take every and any opportunity that comes your way. Get tape any way you can. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Doesn't matter what type of game it is. Get behind a microphone. Get comfortable and make connections. That's the best advice I can give you.
Love it. And that's the advice many young broadcasters should adhere to, and never give up the dream, because dreams can come true, and it came true for Pat McCarthy. Pat, we appreciate you coming on. We thank you so much for your time today, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Let's get back to the 4. Here we go. Gentlemen, that was great. And Pat, thank you so much once again.